You're listening to the Hawke Media Podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping entrepreneurs and executives crush the digital marketing game. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. Let's get into the show.
You're listening to HawkeTalk. I'm here today with Gareb Shamus. How are you?
Doing great. Loving being here.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming on. So to start, take me back. You're 4 years old, huge comic book collection, decided to start one of the biggest organizations in the world. Where'd you start it off?
Well, it all started because I had three brothers. And growing up in a household, I was born in Queens, but growing up right outside of New York City, we were just huge sports fans. And that's when we got into collecting baseball cards at the time. And my dad would always bring home boxes of cards, and we'd do all kinds of games to win these packs. And that really fostered, our love of collecting and following that type of world. And
so how old were you at that point when it started?
Oh, got to be like 6, 7 years old.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, like it's my earliest memories are we would play pool and win packs for my dad. I mean, it was just.
What drove your dad with that? Did he just think it was a cool thing, or do you know why your dad chose to go that route?
No, I just think that he was a huge Yankee fan.
Got it.
And I just think that my dad was really amazing at coming up with ways to interact with us.
Yeah.
I do find that it's parents have to learn how to speak to their kids the way they need to be, that way the kids want to be spoken to.
Yeah.
And my parents, and especially my dad, when it came to that, was amazing at that. Like, he knew that the way to our hearts was through baseball cards. So
awesome.
That was his communication with us.
Got it.
And because I had three brothers, we would flip we'd get cards, and then we'd go to school and flip cards.
Yeah.
And my brothers and I, we had like a little racket going where we'd win a lot of cards. We'd come home, we each would start with a stack of 25 every day, and then come home with 100 or 50. Sometimes we'd come home broke.
Yeah.
And so we amassed this large collection. And that's when my youngest brother kind of took over our collection.
I was gonna say, where do you follow in the eldest, so to speak?
I'm number two.
Number two, got it.
But there's only 6 years between my oldest brother and my youngest brother.
Got it.
So we were all really close in age. When we went to school, we'd all be in the same school together.
Does that make you all Irish twins?
No, none of us.
That's 15 months. Okay.
Yeah. There's 14 months between my older brother and me, and then 18 months between us, and then 3.5 years.
Got it.
But it was close. It was close. Yeah. And so once we started getting into buying and selling baseball cards, then all of a sudden we started going to stores that had comic books, and then we started collecting comic books. And that's really where, all of a sudden our whole eyes lit up to, wow, there's this extraordinary world out there, more than just the Archie comics or the Richie Riches or things like that.
Yeah. And how old are you when you started the comic thing?
That had to be like around, I was probably about 10, 12 years old around then.
Got it. And so were you always buying and selling? Were you selling the cards when you first went in? Were you actually starting to make money off baseball cards?
Not really.
Okay.
When we were kids, it was really just fun.
Yeah.
And
got it.
Was when my youngest brother started getting into it in a big way, he was now all of a sudden, he started having rookie cards from our years.
Yeah.
And that's when all of a sudden, Tom Seaver and Don Mattingly and Nolan Ryan and all those type of players really quite good and all started getting hot. And then all of a sudden he had all these cards, and then he would trade our cards for more cards.
Got it.
And it almost became like this fun business that the family was involved in.
Yeah.
And then we started going to shows on the weekend, and we started buying and selling. And that's when my mom got the bug to open up a sports card and comic book store when I was a teenager. And
so you guys basically had the inventory to start it. Is that fair?
Yeah, we had the inventory.
Yeah.
We knew a lot about the business. We had a lot of friends in that world.
Yeah.
And the business was booming. So it was one of those times where it just made it really easy.
And were your parents always entrepreneurial, or was that like their first venture into it?
They were always entrepreneurial.
Okay.
My dad always had his own businesses, small, medium businesses, things that he owned. And so I always grew up with my dad coming home from work and being like, he never would say, "Oh, my boss sucks."
Yeah.
It's like, it was always upon him to make things work. So I always kind of had that. So we always had that kind of mentality, even buying and selling in sports cards. It wasn't about, working for people. It was like, how do we kind of arbitrage or buy and sell this stuff?
Yeah. No, it makes sense. And so you ended up working in that comic book store throughout childhood?
Yeah, absolutely. It was after school. It was all the time. It was weekends.
Is this in Queens?
No, this was in Rockland County,
Okay.
right outside of New York City, right north of Manhattan.
Got it.
And my dad worked in the city at the time, and then we had the store in Rockland County.
Nice.
Yeah.
And so take me through it. Then you do that while you're like high school age. Did you end up going to college, or what happened next?
Yeah. So I wound up going to college, and it was really fun. I went to University of Albany, and what happened was, because my mom had the comic shop, she would literally, every few weeks would send me a stack of comics. And so I knew what was going on in the comic books. And because at the time, comics literally were like 99 cents or $1 a comic book. Yeah. And because of the store, we had like 65% off discounts to buy them. So the comics only cost like 35 cents a piece. So even a stack of 20 books, even back then, was only like, $5, $6, $7. So when I was done with them, I literally would just give them out to everybody. And so I was kind of known as like the comic book guy up there. Nice. And so that was really fun. And then also while I was in college, I used to work for the school newspaper, and I used to sell advertising for them. And we were twice a week nonprofit. So I got really good at selling, but also we made so much money as a nonprofit newspaper that we wound up getting Macintosh Apple computers back in the earliest days of desktop publishing. So we bought like the first versions of Quark and Adobe and the first laser printer that Apple ever came out with. So we would actually went completely desktop, and we're talking about the late 1980s here. Yeah. So it was pre-internet and literally the first of the Apple computers that were desktop friendly. So it was very, very revolutionary at the time. So I became an expert, on the Apple computers when they first came out. And then ultimately what happened was I graduated in May of 1990, and it was a very, very bad job market. So I literally moved home after school and couldn't find a job. So I started working full-time in the comic book store.
Got it. And your parents were welcoming of that? They understood? Like, were they always supportive of all this?
Oh yeah. My parents were always very supportive of us. They, they always felt like as long as we were properly educated, we could do anything that we want. It's one thing in life that no one can take away from you, is your education. Yep. So they always felt like it was important to be well-educated. And also they never really pushed us into any profession. It was always like, get a great education, and whatever you do, just love it. Yeah. And it was this really amazing childhood that we had. And because it was all about comics and sports cards and things like that, we really, it really was fun. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. And so how long did you work in the family store? How long did you end up sticking with that?
So I was working there for a while, a bunch of months, but I hated retail. I just did not like that business. I didn't like having to cater to people one-on-one. But what I did have was I had a photocopy machine there, and I did have an Apple computer. Yeah. So that's when, I decided that there was a lot of interesting things going on in that world, where the comic book publishers would tell the stores what was coming out months before they came out. And again, this was all pre-internet time. So it's not like, so having a 3-month head start on the market was very valuable time. So we would take that information, compile it into a printed newsletter, and then run it off on the Xerox machine. And it was literally a Xerox machine. Yeah. And then staple it together and then hand it out to the customers that walked in. And we would be doing hundreds of copies of this thing every week. And what would happen is everybody started buying more comics because we were recommending all the new things that were coming out, what was hot. And then back in the day, people would have us reserve the copies that they want. So we would have these reserve bins. And that part of the business started exploding. Yeah. And the guy that ran the comic book side of the store was really funny, knew everything there was about comic books.
He wasn't like the guy from The Simpsons.
What was that?
He wasn't like the comic book guy from The Simpsons.
No, not quite, not quite. But he was really, he just had a really great, sensibility for comics. Also, kid, never graduated high school, but super smart. And then we also had a lot of customers that knew everything about what was going on. A lot of kids in high school there. Yep. So what we would do is we also recruited kids from the store to contribute writing as well.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So between all of us, we were able to put together this newsletter. Yeah. And the name of the store was called The Wizard of Cards and Comics. So that was the name of the newsletter. And then that went so well that the next thing that we kind of got into was coming out with a price guide on what the prices of the comic books should be called. So I made this little kind of digest size booklet with thousands of prices in there. And I called it like the official guide, and I mailed it out to.
I would say, how'd you come up with the pricing?
It was a combination of just seeing what was going on pricing in our store. Yeah. And then just kind of going to the shows and seeing what things were selling for.
So you really did your research.
Yeah. And then because it wasn't so liquid the way collectibles have become because of the internet, people weren't used to prices changing on a daily basis. It was this kind of lag time involved anyway. So people would, check their mail every month to see what the new pricing was going to be.
Yeah.
And then there were market forces at play too. Things would sell out, so the next ones would come in at a higher price anyway.
Yeah.
And so we would send this thing out, and then there was surveys in there that people would send out. And then I remember I got a nasty letter from Random House because they called it the official, and they owned the word official when it came to price guides. Yeah, so that was my first legal letter I ever got.
That's funny. Did you panic? Because usually the first one you panic a little bit, and then you realize it's just par for the course.
A little bit. But the resolution was just don't use that word. So it was a cease and desist.
Yeah, no, I get it.
It was very easy to cease.
That's awesome. So were you selling that guide? How was that guide?
No, it was all free.
It was. Okay.
It was definitely something that, it cost me a bunch of photocopy paper and a few hundred stamps just to get that kind of feedback. And the feedback was great. People really liked it. And then all of a sudden, I felt like it needed to be more than that. I needed to do something that was more substantial, more national in nature. And up until that time, my dad was a big comic book art collector. So every time we would go to a show, like a comic book show, we would meet some artists and writers and things like that, but the artists would sell their art. So we had become friendly with a bunch of the really big artists in that world at the time. One of them was this guy named Todd McFarlane, who everybody knows created this character Spawn, but he's become very, very big in the toy business. He does a lot of the sports figures. He does The Walking Dead. He does DC Comics now. So he's done a lot of very big toy lines out there. And we've become friends with Todd throughout the years, buying his art. And for my dad's birthday one year, we commissioned Todd to do a Spider-Man for my dad because he was the big artist on Spider-Man. Yeah. And he did Spider-Man in a wizard outfit. And So I wound up using that as the cover to the first issue of Cards. Yeah. So and then in that issue we interviewed Todd and talked about all the things that was going out. So starting in the year kind of 1991 is when I incorporated, and that's when I started putting the magazine together.
How many years from college to 91? I don't know when you graduated.
Well, I graduated May of 90.
So it was just a year later. So you basically worked on this stuff. You started the newsletter that year, and then a year later you built this out. Awesome.
Yeah. And then starting by the end of 1990 is when I started thinking about doing a magazine. And then when the new year started, it's like, all right, let's just do this.
Got it.
And then I put together my first magazine. And then we debuted a version of it at the San Diego Comic-Con at the time. And it was just at that time, back in 1991, you're talking about the fact that there was maybe, a few thousand people that attended, a few hundred exhibitors. It was only comic books. It was only old people selling old comic books on tabletops.
Yeah. And when did Comic-Con start? When was the first Comic-Con?
So there was two that got started near simultaneously. There was one in San Diego.
Yeah, that
probably started 25 years prior.
Oh, wow.
And then there was one in Chicago that had started maybe 22 years prior.
Okay, so you're talking mid to late 60s was when.
Or early even 70s. But it was something around there. But again, Comic-Con was just short for Comic Convention. It didn't really mean anything.
Right.
It was called San Diego it wasn't even like a brand. It wasn't anything that people think of today.
Right.
When they hear that word. Or those words. And
so you launched there, and what happened? People immediately go, "This is amazing," and off to the races?
Yeah. So I spent a lot of money to print a few thousand copies, and I had them shipped there, like rush ship them. They were on a skid. Literally, my booth was a skid of books, and with the sign in the background. And I was just handing out free copies to everybody that walked by. And, it was both incredible and demoralizing all at the same time, because there was a whole bunch of people that I think took it just to be nice to me. Yeah. There were quite a few people that loved it. Mm-hmm. And then there was a lot of people that were literally like, "What do we need this for?" And they would literally hand it back to me. And it was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe, like, I'm giving you this for free. Like, the whole world needs this. Why would you ever give it back? It's like, I'm not even charging you for it."
Yeah.
And but I did go out of there, with a pretty amazing sense that this was something that people wanted. And also the industry itself, the people in the business, they really loved it. They were the ones that said, "Wow, this industry needs something that really puts what we do on a pedestal." Because up until that point, there was just some really, really bad black and white newspaper print, things that existed out there, which talked about pricing or dealers. It was just, that looked like a newspaper. I mean, it was just nothing that represented the industry well.
Got it. And so where'd you take it from there? Did you immediately go for distribution? What was the next step?
Yeah. So what happened was, back in 1991, there was already a distribution network set up. Uh-huh. So there was a whole system set up for magazines and comic books set up into the comic book stores. So it was a big company called Diamond Comics. There was one called Capital City. There's probably about a dozen distributors there that distributed to this network of about 3,000 or 4,000 comic book stores. So we went into those catalogs. We had sold through there. We sold about 30,000 copies of the first issue, which was amazing. But again, we got caught up in that cycle where basically people had to order months in advance before they ever saw it. So the retailers were ordering the second and the third and even the fourth copies before they even sold through on the first one. Huh. So basically our sales started tanking. And even though all the fans started getting a hold of it and wanting it, the retailers just didn't have enough copies out there. So that's why by our sixth issue, we started going onto the newsstand, where we started printing a lot of extra copies for newsstand distribution. Now that's what's called a returnable business. So that's now all of a sudden, they can return copies that were unsold. So little did I know how much risk I was creating, for myself by doing that, because we were printing a lot of extra copies that would then go unsold.
Right.
So then all of a sudden, I basically got to basically by the 7th or 8th month into this thing, and we were just starting to lose a lot of money there. Yeah. Because the comic book stores started selling some more copies, but not a lot. Yeah. The newsstand was costing a lot of money to be there. Plus they had literally 180-day terms on their books. So I was just printing a lot of copies with not a lot of cash coming in. Yeah. And that's really when I kind of had this heart-to-heart with my dad, that, it wasn't working. And I didn't know what to do. And I remember one evening, he came home from work, and, I had this kind of one-on-one with him, and I was all ready to break down and give up. And and he wanted no part of it. He's like, Gareb, you just have to make it work. He didn't even there was no doubt in his mind about what needed to get done, which was just to figure it out and make it work. I was almost like, I almost wanted his permission to quit.
Yeah, exactly.
And he didn't give it to me. And then
Nice.
After that moment in time, I was like, wow, I really gotta figure this out. Where can we save? What's working? What can we reconfigure? How do we cut, and how do we build into the areas? And then right after that, something pretty miraculous happened, which was there was about 7 artists that were at Marvel, including Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee, a guy named Rob Liefeld, Mark Silvestri, and those were 4 of the 7 guys. They were selling millions of copies of their comics, and then they decided to leave Marvel to form their own company called Image, where all of a sudden they were going to start owning the characters that they created and not just getting a royalty off of Marvel's comics.
Yep.
And at that moment in time, Marvel and DC were probably 95% of the market. Like, the independents were very, very small. Marvel and DC controlled the business. They owned all the characters. And there wasn't this kind of this rush behind helping people have their own rights or own their own stuff.
Yeah.
The industry was very, very low on helping out these independent creators out there. And at that time, Marvel and DC were difficult to work with. I was 22, I think, at the time, maybe 23. I looked like I was 16 years old. They were difficult to work with. And all of a sudden, these guys that I'd been friends with decided that they were going to go out on their own. And again, it was pre-internet. It was like 1992 at the time, maybe 93. And all of a sudden, they call me up in the middle of the night one night, and they're like, Gareb, we just left. We just formed this new company. We want to work with you on this. They were out in California. I was in New York. I think I hopped on a plane the next day with a camera, took a picture of them, and started mapping out how we're going to work together and get the word out there. And that was like, that was a marriage made in heaven in terms of just us working together. They needed publicity.
Yep.
We needed a great company to work with. We knew the talent. We were friends. They just wanted to get out there. So those guys, we said, let's do covers, let's do interviews, let's really get the word out. And then everybody wanted to know what was going on out there. And we were the only source for that.
It's just a testament to the cliche of like, the more you work, the luckier you get. Like, you were doing all this so much that you ended up making these friends that when they did make a move, you were ready to take on that opportunity because you were doing it and you stuck with it. If you hadn't listened to your dad and had cashed out, you wouldn't have had that phone call.
Absolutely. We were just in the right place. And then it became the right time.
Right.
And that's what helped. And then our sales skyrocketed. Then I'm talking like, we started selling 100,000, then 200,000 copies a month. The magazine went global. All of our financial worries went away. The money just came pouring in on that. And it was pretty a spectacular time, as to what happened there.
And your friends that started their own group, what comics did they end up coming out with? Who are their characters anyone would know?
Yeah, well, the big one was Spawn. That
Okay.
Todd McFarlane created. They've got a movie now in the works, a second movie. Jim Lee had created a comic book called Wildcats, which ultimately became an animated series. And then Jim Lee's studio ultimately wound up selling to DC Comics, and Jim is now the publisher of DC Comics.
Got it.
And a great friend. And then Rob Liefeld started a book called Young Blood, and Mark Silvestri started a book called Cyberforce. And then he built a really great business, and his company is behind the movie The Wanted, and and a whole bunch of other really amazing properties out there. So it was a pretty amazing group out there. They wound up to becoming pretty prolific in the comic book world, and it was an incredible symbiotic relationship because we were all kind of in our early 20s, some mid 20s. And we just needed each other out there, because we also, I think also people were afraid to buy a non-Marvel or DC comic book
Yeah.
And we also gave people, in a way, permission to buy it because, they knew that we were going to be there to support it, and tell people that it's okay. We love it. You should too.
Yeah. It's the third party validation we talk about in marketing. Like that's one of the 3 pillars is trust. And if you don't have your own brand to stand on, you have to get it through third party, meaning like someone else has to give you that trust. And then there's, I always love pointing because it's some people know it and don't, but have you ever watched How I Met Your Mother?
Yeah.
So there's that line that Barney always gets Ted introduced. He always just goes, "Hey, have you met my friend Ted? Have you met Ted?" And it's his line. He says it even though the person doesn't know Barney, but it's like this whole like third party validation thing where they're like, "Oh no, hi, like I don't know who you are, but you just validated him." People work that way. It's really interesting. So even if they didn't know your magazine, a lot did, but a lot didn't. You speaking up for someone else, that validation creates trust for both of you, frankly.
Absolutely. Yep. And then they would use our magazines to open up the door for them.
Yep.
And say, hey, look what Wizard wrote about them.
Yeah.
And they would use that as well. And for many years, that's what a lot of people did, to get their product into the movie and television business. We'd write about it. They'd take our magazine, hand it to the studios and be like, here, you see, we just got written up in this magazine that, millions of people are reading.
So how long did you run the magazine for?
The magazines, we ran them for about 20 years.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Oh yeah.
So you ran it, you said 91 to 2011. Is that?
Yeah. About 2000. About 2010. Yeah. Around that range, 2011.
And what ended up, obviously it grew, it was a huge success, but what ended up happening? What took you out of it?
So basically what happened was in 2007 and 8, when the economy collapsed, that became the toughest time in history for pulp magazine publishing. What happened was everybody pulled back on their advertising. That was the first thing to go. And then also, so paper prices went up a lot. And then on top of that, it was at the birth of the iPhone and the iPad. So what was happening now is a lot of people were starting to get their content free through websites, and people wanted to not pay for content, and they would just rip us off, So it became one of those things where it was very, very hard to compete with the magazines with what was going on, in the online world. And there's just a kind of a unit economics, when it comes to magazines where, I think it would cost like literally $50,000 or $75,000 or $100,000 to make the first magazine. And then maybe it's like 48 cents after that. But, it would cost a lot of money at the time to actually just print that one magazine. And if the sales aren't there, there's just nothing to pay for it. So then it wasn't worth it to do it. But what wound up happening was back in the mid 90s, what was going on was with the Comic-Con space and the convention side of things, what was happening was we were getting much bigger. Image was getting bigger. A lot of other upstarts started launching their companies, but the old guard really hated the new guard, the new people that were coming up. They just didn't like the excitement we were creating. They thought we were rebellious. They thought we were, trying to sell stuff that was garbage or junk, or nobody believed it. Like we were called every name under the book, and it was an industry that they thought that they were just rejecting us, and they weren't letting us do the things that we needed to do because we were bringing a lot of new people in, and they liked the old business. So that's when I bought the Chicago Comic-Con. And I bought that in the mid 90s, like 95, 96 is when I bought that. And at the time it was maybe 2,000-3,000 people in a hotel. And again, it was just comic books. It was literally, boxes of comic books on tabletops that people would just show up and buy back issues. And, and what I bought it more for a marketing expense more than anything. It really wasn't a business. We really went.
What year did you buy them?
In 96.
Oh, okay. Got it.
When it got completed. Yeah. So again, pre-internet,
there
was no mass media around comic books or superheroes. None of these Marvel films were out the way they are today. And also at the time, being a geek or a nerd was a very derogatory term. That was definitely being an outcast, a loser. It was synonymous with being an asshole. It was just like whatever you can ascribe to wanting to belittle somebody. Calling them a geek or a nerd was the label that you could use, to make someone feel bad about themselves. So when I bought the show, it was really a marketing. It was really, how do we bring to life what we do in the magazines? So yes, we sold booths to the retailers and we sold booths to the publishers, and we invited all the movie studios and the television networks and the video game and toy companies, because at that time we started writing a lot about those in the magazines and building that audience. And at the time also we were selling, I think around 400,000 copies a month. So the magazine was in 75 countries. It was global in nature. And so we were really ubiquitous at the time, but there wasn't a live event that represented what we were doing. And that's what we wanted to do. So we ran our first event and about 10,000 people showed up. And it was really—
You said before that you had like 2,000 or 3,000, right? So was that because of your brand on it? Or was that because your execution? Do you think that drove that?
It was everything. It was the fact that it was our brand. So everybody knew that we were doing it. They had to be there. We had a might because we were able to advertise and promote it in the magazine months ahead of time. We enlisted all the local comic book stores to sell tickets, and we gave them booths, and we got the whole local community involved. So we did and we took out newspaper ads, and we took out billboards, and we did a lot of radio spots and radio promotions. And then everybody that the artists and the writers, everybody told their friends that they were going to be doing it. So it became a kind of a really great industry community event. But we were totally blown away when so many people showed up, because that's when the whole kind of superhero movement galvanized. Is really when all these people saw so many people like themselves that were into it, and then they realized that, wow, I'm not alone. This is okay. What I do is fun and fine. And that's really what got everybody to feel like, wow, I love this. And it also, because it was in Chicago, a lot of people got to meet and see people that they knew, but they didn't realize that they were into it. So it also kind of brought people together that knew each other, but didn't realize, because everybody was afraid to admit that they were into it.
That makes sense.
And then what happened was we encouraged people to dress up in costume, and we gave them prizes for that. And then what would happen is, once the event happened, we took a lot of pictures and then started posting that in the magazine. And because the magazine was global, everyone around the world got to see what was happening. And that's when the whole lid blew off of it. And then, then San Diego took off. We took off. I mean, I think the next year we had 30,000 people that showed up. I mean, it started building like crazy. And then cut to, background before the economy started going bad in 2007 and 8. I think we had about 3 shows at the time. And then once the economy started going down, that's when all of a sudden too, Facebook was starting to gain a lot of popularity as well. And all these clubs were starting to be created, and everybody was going digital at the time. Everybody was starting to say, oh, we need to put our groups online. We need to go online. Everything went that way. And we basically said to ourselves, look, at some point in time, people are going to want to get back together again in person. And all these groups that formed on Facebook, they're going to want to meet in person. So let's go back into the event business. Let's go deeper into that. So as the magazines were going down, we doubled down on the event side of thing. And that's when I bought up probably about 15 or 16 Comic-Cons out there. So I bought a lot of the regional Comic-Cons that were out there, everything from ones in Florida, Connecticut, Texas. I mean, just, you kind of name it.
All domestic, or did you go
all domestic? Yeah. Oh, there was one in Canada, one in Toronto. But yeah, just literally wherever we can find a local show that had any kind of traction whatsoever, we bought them up and kind of rolled them into what we called like our tour. And then by the time things started to merge, out of the bad economy in 2011 and 12 and then 13, all of a sudden everybody wanted to get out again. And that's when all of a sudden, we had the events. And then also 2010, 2011, that's when, Marvel films started coming out, with Iron Man. And all of a sudden now there was this massive interest in what was going on in this space. And we became the destination for people to go. Makes
sense. And so how long did you stick with that business? How long did you run those Comic Cons?
Well, we were running them since 96, 97, all the way. So then the company that I had formed, by 2006, we had about 24 events a year, almost 1 million people a year through the door.
Wow.
And then I had brought in some big investors into that business. And we definitely had a difference of opinion of where to go. And then basically my brother and I left and then took a little bit of time to reformat, what we thought Comic-Con should be. Because when we started it, it was all about being very inclusive, where we wanted to make sure anybody that wanted to be to partake in it or participate, there was a place for them. And it's gotten so big that they wound up becoming very exclusionary, meaning it would sell out. The panels, people wouldn't be able to attend because, they would sell out. The toys, they do limited edition toys that would sell out. So now people couldn't get the toys. So it wound up becoming a miserable experience because people would go and want to be involved in everything and then they couldn't. So that's one thing that happened. The second thing that happened was all with how big the Marvel movies had gotten. There, all of a sudden, the celebrity side of it became really, really big. And the people who played these superheroes became global box office stars. So that's another thing that happened. The other thing that happened was there was this transformation from being into comic books to being into superheroes. And the people that liked comic books looked to disdain upon the people that liked superheroes. And
did not know that was a rivalry.
So it all, because they were there first, and if it wouldn't happen unless they supported it, right? So again, it created this very exclusionary thing. And then the last thing that happened was social media, which was on, like, the idea of now Instagram was becoming, the social media of choice. And all of a sudden what happened was autographs were the currency in the past for collectibles and meeting people. And now with Instagram, the currency became the photo op. The photo with the celebrity. Creating that FOMO and that selfie and posting that on social media so that you could show your friends how cool you are. And my brother and I, for years, had literally kind of commercialized the idea of taking a professional photo that celebrities can charge for. Because up until that point, you would really taking really crappy photos with a camera, and then if you wanted to post it on social, it wasn't digital. And then the selfies were a disaster. People would blink, and it would take up a lot of time. And then all of a sudden, we were like, hey, look, we brought in a professional photographer. For $20, you can get a picture with a professional photographer, professional background. We'll give you a digital copy of it that you can post. And it was like a revolt. People would yell and scream at us, like, how could you charge for a photo? Until we then perfected it until it became something where, like, wow, it became really valuable. And so that took off. So by 2017, my brother and I started a new company.
When did you leave Comic-Con?
2016.
Oh, 16. I thought you said 6. Got it. So you were with Wizard magazine. Did you just shut that down in 2011, or what ended up happening? Yeah. We wound up just shutting the magazines down. Some of the other magazines were shut down in 2008, 9, then Wizard was in 2010. So those were out of business at that moment in time. They had a wonderful time and place, and it just ran its course. And so you built, so 2016, you leave Comic-Con. Next year, 2017, your brother and you get together, and what happens? We decided to figure out all the things that we loved about what we did, and take all the things that didn't work, weren't fun,
were very hard to do, the things that the fans didn't like, and we got rid of all of that. And all the things that fans liked, that we enjoyed, that made money, we kept all that stuff. And then the other thing that we did was, the other thing, in addition to all these social media things that were happening, live streaming started coming online. And so that to me was like the breakthrough of how do we bring something like what we do to a mass audience. So we decided to do these boutique shows. And by boutique, I mean 10 to 25,000 people with the biggest celebrities in the world. And then live stream it all over the world on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, just whatever format we could do. We wanted everyone to see what was going on. And then that came out to a roaring success. The first celebrities we got were Gal Gadot, Henry Cavill, Jason Momoa from the Justice League. We got Chris Evans, Captain America, and Tom Holland from Chris Evans, obviously Captain America, Tom Holland, Spider-Man, and a whole bunch of other like amazing Avengers. And so right out of the box, we had this extraordinary couple of events. We kind of set that whole world on fire, live streamed the events, and then literally within no time, we had hundreds of millions of people, checking into our content to see what we were doing. And so we were off to the races. And then ultimately we wound up running 7 events with Ace. We had an 8th event planned for March of 2020. And so we all know what tidal wave of COVID hit us. So unfortunately, we weren't able to produce that event in Boston at the end of March.
And so what's next? Like, obviously take a pause for COVID, understood you can't have that. What do you think is coming down the pike for you? What's next for you? You've had a pretty amazing career so far.
Oh yeah, thank you. So what's next is basically, we pivoted the company into doing private signings with the celebrities. So at a time when it was very difficult for people to meet the celebrities, they still wanted to get their Captain America shield signed or their Thor hammer signed or their Star Wars memorabilia. So we set up deals with the talent that people could at least submit their stuff to get signed.
Like they would ship it in, like, because you say private. Okay.
What we did was we designated about 10 people in that business that people could ship to, so that they can organize it, collect it, deal with professional handlers. And then we set up a private setting where people could now, with let's say 10 people, bring all the stuff that everybody wants signed. We bring the celebrity into that room, gloves, masks, everything, obviously this was during COVID. They could sign all the stuff, and then everything gets shipped back to the fans. So we've been very successful in being able to pivot and do that kind of stuff. And now we're just waiting for things to open up again so that we can start running live events.
I was going to say, you're planning on opening it back up. Do you have any thoughts of when you think you're going to do that?
We're not sure yet because it's one of those things where, unlike sporting events or concerts or Broadway, where the talent is here and the fans are there, in our world, the talent and the fans are like this. So we have to wait until the talent feels comfortable, meeting with the fans again. So we needed to get to a point where, there was enough mass vaccination, everyone felt comfortable again. A lot of people became germaphobes during this period of time. So we need to wait till kind of we overcome that. So
it's funny. My cousin's always been that germaphobe. Basically everything we all adopted with COVID was stuff he did pre-COVID, and we all called him weird. Like if I'd sneeze around him, he'd be like, what the hell? Like, get away from me. And now I feel like everyone does that. Like he would always have Purell on him, always wash his hands all the time. And I'm like, you're just weird, man. You'll be fine. Don't worry about it. And then we all basically became my cousin during COVID, which has been a fun reflection.
And that will linger.
I agree. Yeah.
As much as people think that it's over with, or we've been able to move past it, that element of it won't.
Which I don't think is a bad thing. And so last question for me is, for someone trying to pursue their dream or go after something or achieve at a high level, what's one piece of advice you don't think they normally hear? One thing that you've learned that you don't think enough people talk about?
A lot of it is not to be afraid to fail, and take chances. Most people are young enough where, all can be forgiven, or and we live in a very forgiving society. In a lot of other countries, people aren't as forgiving, but definitely here, we live in a country which is very, very open and forgiving for people that want to take a chance. I think people be very surprised that the more they're interested in changing the world, or the more they're interested in doing something big, the more interest there is.
Yeah.
I kind of joke that every time I try to do something small, I failed. It's only the big things that I succeed at.
Yeah.
And I think because a lot of people want to be a part of that success, and they want to be on that train, and they want to be with you, in that movement. You can't be afraid to do that. And by failure, it doesn't mean, having to take on massive debt and try something and mortgage your house. Like it's really everything from just as simple as sending emails or texts to people that you want to work with. What's the worst that happens? They don't respond. Okay.
Yeah. You're in the same spot you were.
Exactly. Then you just work with the people that respond to you and take it from there. I know that like when I first started, I was asking Marvel and DC to do everything, and they just kept saying no. But I just worked with the companies that said yes.
Yep.
And until eventually I got to a point where they couldn't escape it. They couldn't escape me. And then they had to work with us.
Love the line, couldn't escape me. Well, Gareb, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for coming on HawkeTalk.
Oh, thank you so much. Love being here.
Of course.
You've been listening to the Hawke Media Podcast. To ensure that you never miss an episode, make sure to subscribe to the show in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.